We are here with Barry Grant talking about ambiguous losses, non death losses, and her wisdom on that. And of course, I will add in as a psychotherapist. Barry, welcome today to another Substack Live. So good to see you.
You too. You too.
What do you wish more people knew about like divorce, losing friendship, stuff that's not what we think of as grief, like just someone passing away?
Yeah, I think because of death loss, we get into that kind of like comparison where we don't name some of the
Right.
losses, even though we are, riddled with maybe despair and sadness and all the other things that come with grief of moving energy through the body on account of loss, that we don't name these non-death losses time to grief. So we don't make space. We don't think of them as, they don't have ritual that we're
Right.
accustomed to around, there's no, after a divorce, some people will have a party. My friend Steph had something called a faux funeral. She made her own, right? She made her own. But I think a situation where maybe someone is still present, what you were saying, what you were calling ambiguous loss, where somebody is still present, but you're grieving them, whether it's a friendship or a divorce. We don't name that grief
Mm-mm.
necessarily, or time to grieve, or give us ourselves the space to grieve. I think also it's complicated even when someone has a diagnosis of a long illness, or we do, that we don't also name that space to name it grief and cope in a way that we would if we were moving that grief through the body on account of that loss.
Right. No, I think you bring up an excellent point there. So when people have really tenuous, ambiguous relationship situations, like you said, where they know a divorce is coming, maybe separation, prolonged separation, whatever it is, people's nervous systems can really be elevated with that sympathetic response. There can be an up and
Mhm.
down. It can be, oh, well, we're trying again to get back together, or maybe we will. The more ambiguous the message, the more up and down there is, and the more unpredictability. And our brains and bodies really go around and around overthinking and going into an activation mode to try to resolve that. I mean,
Mm.
elevated cortisol, inflammation, I mean, even friendship loss can lead to stuff like that. And I think in our day and age now, people can move among even friendships so quickly. And you see articles and big publications about being ghosted by a friend and the pain of that,
Sure.
that you just don't hear about as much because it sounds like it's less of a big deal. But anytime there's emotional investment, that's
Connection, yeah, and connection, yeah, sure. The emotional connection is lost, but the physical connection is not lost. I think that's what makes it so complex and so complicated. To me, some parts of it are almost worse because that person is still out there, the friends, ex, like they're still out there living in the world. And I think that really complicates things too. It can be so hurtful to think that their life and the life you imagined is no longer continuing on, right? And, and they are out in the world on a different trajectory than you imagined with them along for the ride.
absolutely. I mean, I'm thinking of what some people call post infidelity stress disorder now,
Mhm.
where there's chronic stress, rumination, elevated anxiety, even depression when people discover they've been cheated on.
Mhm.
And that hypervigilance there, trust issues, shame, if someone thinks that it reflects on their lack of worthiness, their worthiness or lack of, really. I think that's a really good under discussed topic. And I mean, and it cuts across functionality, like someone who is otherwise doing really well and doesn't struggle with PTSD or
Mhm.
chronic anxiety can be knocked for a huge loop when what they thought was going well, or a friendship that they really leaned on is not there. And there's temptation to outreach that person or to consider what they're doing because there's not a finality, like you said. There's a lack of closure, and people can really struggle with that.
Yeah, I think we're even finding that with, aging parents. I experienced that with an aging parent. I think we are dealing with what are really I would call catastrophic situations that we're tolerating more and more of these losses as the sandwich generation, taking care of kids and also taking care of parents. So I just think there are so many, like you said, non-death losses in the world that are creating a lot of anxiety, depression, a lot of um, we're not calling it grief. So we are, I think, there are many things that we are showing up, at doctors and saying like, I just feel terrible. And, we get like the fix, like we're looking for the fix. But I think not that naming it grief is certainly a cure, but I think it gives us the permission to access the kind of, like you said, the kind of therapy that would help us to facilitate some kind of healing by knowing that this theory, if you want to know more about it, made famous by Dr. Pauline Voss, of what exactly ambiguous loss is. It's unique. We don't hear it a lot, or we hear the term tossed around and people not really understanding, as you said, all of the side effects that can come along with it, the physical effects.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And I think I see it in my sessions. I mean, so people who are really high functioning and who maybe have generalized anxiety disorder and tend to overthink. I mean, add to that the impending loss of something like a divorce that blindsided them or that was a long time coming, but now it's actually the day to day absences and having to divide up stuff and work
Mhm.
out custody with kids. 'Cause that's enough. That's grief on grief. You're losing a partner, then you're also usually losing at least some time with kids that they're
Mm,
gonna have, and that
yeah.
communal sense is lost. It's really it's worldview loss or worldview grief, I think. Like, you have to completely transition your worldview.
Agreed. And you've already maybe written the story. I always say like you've written like the forever in your mind's eye. And because that is not what's happening, you can't even imagine rewriting a future. It's also usually like not just the dissolution of the marriage, but as you said, it's like the dissolution of financial security, your sense of safety in the world. I think I went through a divorce after 17-year marriage and had a very young. One of my kids was really young, like 18 months. And the idea that I was not going to be present for any of her life when she was away from me visiting, especially at that young age, was probably the hardest part. That there was a part of her day to day care and childhood that
Right.
I was not different than school, which also was hard for me. But I don't know then, way before my trainings, that I would have named what I was feeling in that transition grief, ambiguous or or any other kind of name that I would have known. Um, or that it was anxious grief, or that it was, they don't even ask. That's the other thing. Sometimes you'll do an intake form when you show up at a doctor and it will have, it will ask you sort of like a depression intake. What would you call that paperwork?
Yeah, it's usually the initial, patient paperwork, right? So it's like new
Yeah.
patient paperwork, and then it has depression and anxiety inventories,
Yeah, an
The
inventory.
Beck scales.
Yeah, so I'm filling out the paperwork and it asks me all of this on a scale, but it never asks me, have I been through something recently that is a major change in life or something, traumatic? It never asks that. So I always tell my clients and folks in workshops and on retreats, just fill it in yourself. Just fill the damn thing in yourself. I am going through a divorce. My father is sick. I just broke up with a best friend. I think that opening, that should be like the opening query to me. Like, what else is going on? So you're showing up with all these symptoms, but not once do they say, I remember showing up with shingles and separation decision, and it was New Year's Day, and no doctor was around, so I ended up in the hospital. and I didn't know what it was. It was like this weird raised rash. It was very itchy. It was warm. It was weird. It got worse from the day before, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I have to go on New Year's Day to, the ER." And this doctor happened to ask, and I was like, "Yeah, I think I'm getting divorced. I think that this is, this is the
Right.
decision that we've made." And it was sort of like the beginning of it, that physical issue, if you will. The what my body did was wild, right? That was the stress. I wasn't able to tell anyone. It was very private. It was very quiet. It probably had a great deal of fear and shame under the hood. And so I think also in those instances, we don't tell a lot of people.
No.
So
No.
yeah. So it's really hard because it starts to show up as a lot of physical symptoms that may not even make sense to us, but certainly we're not.
Yeah. I wish more patients knew how fluid diagnoses are and how limited the paperwork is. Because if I'm seeing a patient and they're coming in and the paperwork says that, and I try to be good about that with my paperwork now, because I can customize it and I can explain it at the session. I can say, like, hey, let's that stuff at the beginning was a nice little initial snapshot, but that's all it was. That was a snapshot. This is almost like the film, if you want to use that metaphor, of what your symptoms are, and you can talk to me about it, and we can figure out what's the best diagnosis, or how you want to describe things, and we fit into that box as clinicians. It's our job to make that work, because those were decided on as the easiest ways to describe something for insurance purposes and
Right.
for shorthand.
Right.
So I think things like people don't know, like adjustment disorder is a lot of what some of this acute non-death grief can be referred to as, because you've had the rug pulled out from under you. Your ability to cope is severely hindered, and you're having to adjust. And you can
Mm,
have more or less depression or anxiety symptoms, or both. When the paperwork can be a little ambiguous or make it seem like it's just going for depression
yeah.
and or anxiety, and it's like, well, but all this is situational. It's like, well, actually we have diagnoses that are situational too. I think the stigma around mental illness is really strong still, and I understand why to an extent. I'll play that. I could see both sides. Like, I think it's disingenuous to say, all mental health conditions have the same prognosis. Like, there's some really, really, really severe ones, and there are some that might take less intervention to get back on your feet, depending on your resources as a patient. Like, if you have a good self-esteem, you have a good support network, then you're
Support.
going to do
Yeah.
better. And people are afraid, like, if they start acknowledging it, they'll pull on that thread and think, oh, I'm totally dysfunctional, when often that's not the case. And it's actually, we deal with a lot of stuff day to day that's mental health related. We just don't add the pathological labels, which I'm fine with. I mean, adjustment disorders can affect anyone. They're temporary depression or anxiety states that you can marshal your competencies in your community and bounce back from.
Right. So I would say it's great to hear you say that. I think most often the first place we would go when we feel symptoms is probably our primary
Yeah,
in many
absolutely.
in many cases. So I love that you can. I know your deep dive. I know you're not gonna make it all equal when someone walks through your door, but I think people don't even know, right? You have to, maybe you have to talk to like lots of doctors if you get a diagnosis. Maybe it's on behalf of someone in your family and you're their caretaker. In a divorce, you're like grappling with a lawyer and filling out financial paperwork, and like you said, the division of all the things in your house. There's so many people that you're talking to that like your well-being is usually not on the top of the list until something
Right.
happens that you
Right.
really feel like, I better go take care of this because I think I'm falling apart. Like there's something about your day-to-day life that is no longer, you're not able to meet the regular responsibilities. It just seems untenable. And maybe you show up with something that's like, just feels like a giant change. Maybe you're sleepless. Maybe there's just so many things, right? Could even be migraines, like so much panic attacks, anxiety showing up for you, maybe like you said, for the very first time. Who knows? So I think maybe your first call might be to the doctor, and because that's
Yeah.
not a very grief literate place to be, they might not ask you anything about, would you like to more information on joining us? support circle with other people that are experiencing something that you are, you're especially in divorce. I think about how we had like that attachment as a kid, right? To this person who loved us. Then we find this peer attachment, whether it's boyfriend, marriage. And
Yeah.
when that attachment goes, we don't really have a place to reattach in that moment. And I think that also
Right.
is hard to name. I think we're built to search for them, right? Like they're missing, there's something missing. I think about that
Right.
from grief, right? Like we're out in the woods looking for them because we're so accustomed to them being part of our life. And also that
Yes.
feeling of just protest and despair. Protest and despair.
Yes. No, I love that. The protest response, the despair response. I mean, it is the phases of grief, which are cyclical. They don't just they can go back and forth. You can be in anger one minute, you can be in bargaining. I think that's often the case with loss is like a friendship with someone who has avoidant attachment or who just isn't who's pulling away when you need support. There's the
Mm.
bargaining, there's the anger that comes from that. And people get caught in that loop with pathological friendships of, you know, feeling someone's gone and then arguing and then having to apologize for that. So when you say protest, that just really reminds me of just the miscommunication that people go through and really the narratives about relationships. I think we're trying to strike a balance now and we don't always do a great job in the narratives of previous generations, which were you're constantly selfless, especially for women. And then now the current generation of almost consumerist community of if it's something's not serving you right now and your friendship's not serving you now, push back and disengage. It's like, well, wait a minute. As two people with separate minds and needs, you're always going to have to renegotiate things.
Yeah.
You're not, so
I
I
don't
think
think we're
that
taught.
serves.
I don't think we're taught how to be friends. But one sec, because I want to go back to stages because
Do it. Love it.
yeah, people people often confuse these. I do think we touch on them in grief, the 5 stages Elizabeth Kubler-Ross developed actually for
Yeah.
those that were diagnosed with a terminal illness, denial,
Right.
and bargaining, depression, and acceptance. I think we, like you said, I think we touch into those, but I think we're always looking for sort of like, if I get through all of these, will I then be done? First of all, we adapted and adopted those for grief. They made sense. They were areas that we do touch into, but I don't believe they're a great model for grieving. I think we will, even like you said, even in a friendship, we might touch all of those, but we are also so ill equipped to have the communication to communicate with like the ghosting. It just blows my mind. I think it's almost like creating boundaries rather than creating communication, right? We can agree to disagree. We can, like you said, renegotiate. I love that idea. What do you think? What do you think people don't know about what's showing up in your office when you see a friendship breakup? Like, what is happening out there in the world that people are not able to accept that renegotiation over time? Like, your needs are not being met in a friendship and we just disappear?
Right. So I've seen sides of that. I think people use therapy language, and it's funny I would bring it up, but I mean, who more ex I would say experienced with it than a therapist too, because I know the language. I was taught the language. It's like we have to learn it. So when people come in and let's say they're on the receiving end of it, of a friendship breakup, it's often, that other person was overwhelmed. And, instead of saying that more, it's more like just a cutoff or like they couldn't handle it at the time. They had their own stuff going on and felt like they were being overwhelmed by other person's emotional needs. So in essence, like in this scenario, my client would be the one who got cut off because that other person had their own family and issues as adults. That person had stuff to deal with, and they had low emotional regulation skill or tolerance. And instead of saying, like, I need to take a moment, I need to take a few weeks or whatever, which would be that would take some confidence and the ability to possibly have a conversation. And if someone has a freeze response to that and is basically thinking like doesn't want to even engage with the disagreement, because I
Mm.
think conflict aversion is a big issue now.
Fear of confrontation, it seems
Absolutely.
major.
Well, I think we've pathologized confrontation more than it ever has, which is weird to me. I think we've depathologized a lot of conversations about anxiety and depression.
Yeah.
But I think that when it comes to confrontation, people think that means everything's bad. It's black or white thinking. And
Uh,
so when your whole life is spent kind of either things are all good or all bad, swipe left or swipe right, the fewer shades of gray and shades of emotion you can handle, the quicker you're going to cut somebody off. So
mm,
yes, someone said in the comments we call it concrete thinking. Yeah, concrete thinking, black or white thinking, very
right.
categorical, on or off like a light switch. So, I've seen that quite a bit of people. And I've heard on the other side, people saying, like, oh, I don't have the emotional bandwidth for this now, and they may communicate it well and say, well, I can't engage with my friend who's very needy. I think we have to look at it. Friendships is this two-way thing where it's not always going to be perfectly matched, but it needs to balance out somewhat.
Hmm.
So when we get narrow with the thinking and think, well, what is it right now versus what is it historically, or how is it starting out? It needs to start out pretty equal, where both people really get to share. It doesn't need to end up someone playing therapist and someone playing, a victim or wounded party constantly, because that's not equal at all. So I think people feeling overwhelmed by all of the things that they're pulled towards. So being scattered and I think being more connected than ever, very conversely, paradoxically, he will feel less connected than ever because there's so much going on that it's difficult to silence that and state switch and say, maybe I can talk for a few minutes, but
Mm,
not a huge amount. I think people have to start to put things in their terms
yeah.
more.
I like that description. I think of this younger generation who's used to texting and communicating on text only and breaking up on text.
Right.
Yeah, it's a hard one. It was hard to negotiate, even generationally with my kids, watching how friendship had changed, right? I was like, I feel like have we helped them learn how to be a good friend? Like, what does it look like to be a good friend? And I think sometimes that's communicating exactly what you said. I do have a few minutes. I saw some stat recently that said something like it just takes 12 minutes to like make a connection with someone and move through an emotion from beginning, middle to end. I don't even know where I was reading that, but I just thought about exactly what you said about what does it look like to show up?
Yeah.
What do you need, right? Like, I don't know. I think it's a lack of our ability to want our needs met, communicate properly. And so the immaturity, I think, I don't know, of up and not saying anything just feels so awful to me. But I don't know. I just think it's never been okay with me.
No, I love that. I mean, I would say thinking on it more, it's I've read things, and this goes back to Jonathan Haidt's research in the anxious generation. Anxiety can justify a lot. The problem is this: it's our emotions can be valid on one hand because there's always this thing of we have a lot of false dilemmas actually.
Mm,
So we have things like, okay, either my emotions are valid and I need to act on them all the time, or they're invalid and I'm not valued as a person. And those are that's a massive false dilemma because your emotions are signals of how you're perceiving reality at the moment, but that doesn't mean that they should dictate how you always behave. Or you're
uh,
always going to be doing the same thing. You're not going to grow.
yeah.
So my issue with it is, I've heard like Gen Z and one of our audience said that the generation gaps are as big as the Grand Canyon between Gen X, millennials, and Zoomers. I mean, so you look at how with the Gen Z people can be afraid to go order separately, go up and speak to a stranger in a restaurant to give their order or whatever, or to phone call anxiety. We started hearing about phone call anxiety, I would say about 10 years ago. It became kind of a meme and a big thing. And so that's even been a millennial culture. But I think we have to get out of the box and our comfort zone periodically to realize that it's not going to do anything to us harmful to open ourselves to some ambiguity, to
Mm,
some risk of being uncomfortable in the moment.
yes. Being uncomfortable. If you communicate it, I think that's the thing. I think we can agree to disagree on so many things, and we have that going on so much right now in our society. But I think so much growth can happen from there where
Yes.
can just, it even is interesting. I heard a newscaster was saying how it is so interesting to maybe turn on something. It reminds me of my one of my kids was in the international baccalaureate program, and often they would like learn about US history, but from a French book. Or so
Whoa.
yeah. So I love the idea that you could also imagine we could get the information from a resource that is not what we, our feed is so full of feeding us with things that affirm our feelings and ideas, right? Like the algorithms of life are giving us more of what we believe. And it feels like if we opened up conversations, communities to sitting with something that might be uncomfortable, learning something new, not only seeing it from the other person's point of view, but sort of societally, what does it look like to zoom out a little bit, you know? I think sometimes the immaturity is like just ditching. Like I'm gonna give up in this moment because my needs are not being and it's confusing and it's hurtful. There's no resolution.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So my thought on that is, and we got a good comment about that too, a question about it, about how like the Gen Z ethos of I'm uncomfortable means you're harming me. It's interesting.
Mm.
I think part of that developed from the 90s era, and it maybe was before, but the recorrection to a lot of colder, more disciplinarian parenting, where the overcorrection was, if you ever make your kids think that they're wrong or that they need to sit with something that's uncomfortable, you're basically abusing them or harming them. And that you don't ever need to say something definitively is wrong. You don't need to phrase it in terms of right or wrong or whatever.
Mm.
And so it's what people derisively kind of had this participation trophy culture insult. It's like, well, so people need to know that it was good that they tried, and that needs to sometimes be its own reward. Like if you didn't win, but you did better than last time, that should matter to you as the person. And parents have to foster that. If you need a trophy to say it or you need to be celebrated like you won, you haven't learned to
Yeah.
internalize
Yeah.
that growth matters.
That everybody wins culture, right? We all get a trophy just for trying. But sometimes we lose. Sometimes we lose.
But what's wrong if you lost and you're getting better? If you're not getting better, maybe it's not the sport for you or you need to
Right.
practice harder. I think we
I
have to
used
almost
to
flip
call,
it.
yeah, I was a gymnast as a kid. So my first instinct was to sign up my eldest in gymnastics. She was very happy to go along with it. And eventually I said, this is the $10,000 cartwheel. Like, this is just not your deal. But I wasn't pushing against her having to be good. I also wasn't saying, you're as good as the rest of the people when she saw kids moving up to team. I mean, she was very happy doing what she was doing, but we needed to have some real talk and just try something else, try something new. And it's the same thing. I feel like the lack of communication skills is creating this like turning away rather than turning toward.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's so many different authors on Substack who talk about dating culture and needs and boundaries. And I mean, one thing is the decision fatigue. So decision fatigue comes from having so many options that you shut down. And
Mm.
so we have to be the ones now to be stronger than ever to say it looks like thousands of different options on dating apps or with social networking, but what if I played my own game and said, when I make a genuine connection with someone or we're aligned in a mission, I'm going to try to make that work through the miscommunication. Or if there is attraction there, even if there's some miscommunication that's non-threatening, like not being actually threatened, then I'm going to work through that. That's my view on it, because that's just from what I've seen. There's so much, cutoff. There's a cutoff culture, and I think a lot of it comes from being so overwhelmed by options that people look for ways to conserve their energy. So part of that's
Oh,
to looking for the ideal.
oh, that's so interesting. And I think we are so much more primed to look for red flags than be yellow. Yeah.
Absolutely. I love
Yeah.
that. Yellow flags. I like that. People say beige flags sometimes, but I like yellow because it's yellow, green, and red.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
beautiful.
I'm
I like
thinking
that.
about that. Like we like immediately look for why it won't work. Yeah, that's so interesting. I had my own swirl around social dating, dating on the dating apps. That's
Ah,
right. That's where I met my husband. So there's so much more support, in my opinion. There are, friend loss. There are extraordinary communities for estrangement, even on TikTok,
Yes.
where you might not think that that is like the most culturally or, sound place to find advice. But sometimes hearing somebody else's story, you can see your own in these areas that are really hard to talk and shameful, like you said, to talk to others about. Sometimes just hearing somebody else's story can help. Divorce groups, sobriety groups.
Yes.
Are you,
Yes,
are you,
I absolutely am. I used to run more groups than I do now. I was a big dialectical behavior therapy fan. I ran a group for that, which really is a big solution to what the youth and dating culture, online culture people are dealing with now. Like, learn to communicate your needs and learn how to say, or learn how to figure out what other people, what you're willing to give and what your minimum is that you need to receive. But
Mm,
that's a tangent. So going back to the groups thing, the male loneliness epidemic that we hear so much about, either for it existing or it doesn't exist or whatever. Well, there's a human loneliness epidemic for one, and men just, I think, don't either put as much effort into friendships with each other or value it as much or embarrassed or whatever. There is a lot of shame and a lot of weird masculinity culture confusion now. But what the works really well for men and why you see a pretty equal compared to normal individual therapy, gender distribution in AA or NA or groups is because there's a mentorship model and it's not really shame based and it's not therapist is the expert listening to the client's emotions and expecting client to emote on command and then you give the client pity. That's what a lot of men, a lot of people who aren't really emotionally expressive think therapy's going to be. And so a group lets you kind of share at your leisure and then pull back a little bit and then share. And I'm all for it because there's
yeah.
valuable work to be done that way.
Yeah. And I always think there's sort of a wisdom exchange in there. Like you hear
There is.
this story and you get something and vice versa. And you can just be like you said, you can be like, hang back and kind of like dip your toe in, see what it's all about. But
Right.
you might actually hear something that's not only super helpful, but makes you feel a lot less alone.
Yeah. Oh, I think we need more of it. I think people's spirituality, their local synagogue, church, mosque, whatever they need to go to, there's a lot of power in that. Secular groups that
Mm.
help people to have so it's just the hub tends to be for a lot of groups, either therapy groups that can seem daunting to
Mhm.
people who don't do therapies, who don't speak therapies of, let me hold space, like process, like all that stuff
Yeah.
does not fit
Yeah.
people the same way. And some of those people who need that kind of stuff the most are the least receptive to it because they just they don't feel comfortable with it. And I get it because even though I'm bilingual, I can speak normal person and therapies. I get that there's this sort of divide there. And I wish more groups were for that liminal space between like serious, PTSD and then just social, where it's like, okay, so maybe adjustment disorder stuff with, and I think that we're getting more of that. And maybe I'll start one, but it's like, what are you struggling with? How can we all laugh together? Because humor, that's another thing in groups. Humor echoes so well. You get people riffing with each other, and that's
Yeah.
part of the process. It's not a
Yeah.
bug, it's a feature.
We talked last night. I have a widows group and we talked last night about Father's Day and how we did have a few laughs about sort of like culturally how pervasive it is and the emails that people get and people asking, "What are you doing for Father's Day?" and being able to say in that group like, "He's dead." And like people actually laughing, like actually having the opportunity to answer as you would like to. And the assumption they were saying in like school, when someone's showing up and they've lost their husband and someone's showing up and the kids are like making a craft for, for Father's Day. But there was a lot of laughter last night. I think that's the most surprising thing when people are in group or on a grief retreat. I think it's the most surprising that there is a lot of laughter and it's not all dark humor. I think it's a release and a relief that you are just not alone in this.
Great. You remind me now of a person I worked with who had a tragic loss, and and even though we're talking about non-death loss here, I think this still very much applies. So you get like this person told me, okay, and I'm being very careful with information here. Like, I went to one of these grief support groups and it was so dark and negative and
Yeah.
so much about just the grief so quickly, I had to leave.
Yeah.
The person felt overwhelmed and left. And it's like, yeah, because that's a lot to walk into.
Yeah. Agree. Agree. And I always say we titrate there, right? Like I only want like the high level story of what it is. Like let's zoom above. Like we don't need to hear all the gory details, but also there should be ways in which you never have to be in charge or responsible for the other people in group. You're there for you. While it is helpful to be in a group situation, but I think in things like caretaking and divorce, those kind of groups are just so supportive. There's nowhere to just talk about how you're faring when you are a caretaker that sometimes doesn't make you sound awful. There is maybe you're trying really hard not to say anything awful about your ex to your kids, but you really need to talk about it. Maybe there's something
Yes.
you need an outlet. You need, what we're calling like the fourth space. We all need that. I think more than ever, somewhere to go that feels like you can have those needs be met. Oh yeah, Geraldine is saying group circles are a form of ritual. I agree. I agree. And knowing that you're going to have somewhere to put down these things that you're holding once a week, once a month, wherever that is, I think it's so good.
Oh, yeah. It's so interesting how we learn more and more and more technologically and about our own brains and bodies and medicine. And I love all the advances we're making. And we're talking now on a platform that's so digitally elegant and allows us to do this because we're in two different states. But on the other side, it's amazing how much we thought was unnecessary, I think. And we're in the information age. And I think we have to remember to connect. And so when you don't have things like, okay, we're going to go to this community center, I'm going to do a bowling league, I'm going to have a smoking room, which I'm not advocating smoking, I'm going to have guys' time, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. That you lose something that people cut out so much and think, well, that wasn't essential. But man doesn't live by bread alone. There is a lot that's essential in just the laughs between grief and the sterling moments between caretaking where you connect with other people who are struggling with it and you can say, man, I'm tired of this, and you don't have to
Yeah.
worry that some judgmental person is going to fault you for it.
We need it. We need it. I love that.
Yes, I love it too. Well, this is spectacular and another fun podcast with you. They're always great. I was surprised by how rich, not really, because it's always great with you, but just the variance of where it went from the non-death grief to how culturally we're grieving because of lack of communication
And
and how
connection.
we handle it.
Exactly. Connection and belonging. I think we really landed there that we do need. And I think that will help us forge the kind of it's a different kind of friendship. Somebody that really
Yes.
understands what it is that we may be struggling so that we can show up in our other friendships where we're not asking of that friendship be our therapist. Like we're really, seriously, I think it is. But we really need that the antidote to our sense of loneliness really is where can we find connection and belonging?
I think that's the lesson. I love it. Connection and belonging. I'm going to be writing more about it. You've inspired me. I think people can band together and take that risk together. Be honest about it. Be open. You may be surprised. Have good boundaries, of course, but be open as well. I think we need to keep that message
Like
there.
also, yeah, like also you naming all of the places and spaces that we do have, even book clubs, sports, like your local library. I always tell people when they feel disconnected, like check out the programming. What are your interests? Find other like-minded souls. And if you are in the kind of non-death loss, like divorce, like caretaking, there are so many groups. So if you need some resources, the two of us can drum one up for you, but nobody needs to do this alone.
No, that's exactly right. Thank you so much, Barry. This has been amazing.
Thanks, Geraldine. Connection, belonging, right here with you too.
Yes.
We'll take it.
Yes, we will. And thank you to Upholding the First, who was putting some really good stuff in there too. So I love doing this with you, Barry. Look forward to the next one
Okay, talk soon. Bye bye.
soon. All right, everyone. Thank you. It's So inspiring seeing you again.